I came home and found my clothes in trash bags near the doorstep. My son-in-law announced proudly, "You don't live here anymore. My mother needs this room and you are moving down south to the country." I looked him in the eye and said, "In that case, I'm throwing one more piece of trash out of my house." He didn't know yet that in an hour I would show him who really runs things around here. Hello, my beautiful listeners. Before I open the door to this story for you, a story about betrayal, cold revenge, and finding freedom, I ask you for one small kindness. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button so as many women as possible can hear this story, and write in the comments what state or country you are listening from. It always warms my spirit when I see how wide our circle truly is. And now, get comfortable. Enjoy the listening. The key turned in the lock with that same heavy, oily click, as always. I loved that sound. There was reliability in it, a promise of silence and peace, which I had missed so much over the last month. The rehab center, for all its benefits, was a government-style place. The clinking of dishes in the cafeteria, the endless chatter of neighbors about blood pressure and grandkids, the smell of bleach in the hallways. I dreamed of only one thing: stepping over the threshold of my apartment, breathing in the familiar scent of original hardwood floors and old book dust. Finally brewing myself some real tea, strong with a sprig of mint in my favorite china cup. I pushed the door open, expecting to see the familiar twilight of the long hallway, but instead of open space, I was met by a wall. A black, glossy, rustling wall. The entire hallway, from the very threshold to the coat rack, was packed with huge garbage bags. They piled on top of each other like bloated leeches, blocking the passage and smelling of cheap plastic, overpowering the noble aroma of my home. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from a sudden, sharp lack of understanding. Renovations? A flood? What could have happened in the month of my absence that Idalene hadn't told me over the phone? I took a step forward, nearly tripping over the nearest bag. It was tied carelessly, and a sleeve was sticking out of the black maw. I recognized it instantly. It was my knitted cardigan, the gray wool one, the very one I wore on cool evenings when I was sorting through archive documents. A chill ran down my spine, instantly pushing out the warmth of the rehab center. I bent down. The side of the next bag was torn. Inside, lying in a messy pile, were books. My books. Volumes of James Baldwin, old art albums, reference books I had been collecting for 40 years. And on top of all this, lying face down, was a frame. I picked it up. The glass was cracked, slashing across the smile of my late husband, Hiram. This wasn't a renovation. This was a purge. Silence hung in the apartment, broken only by a loud, wet crunch coming from the kitchen. Someone was eating, unashamed, with the appetite of an owner. I stepped over the bags, trying not to let the hem of my coat touch them, as if they were contagious. Walking down the hallway, I stopped in the kitchen doorway. Broderick, my son-in-law, was sitting at my solid oak table. He was sprawled in the chair, stretching out legs clad in trendy designer jeans, holding a large green apple in fingers adorned with gold rings. He took another bite, chomped loudly, and finally noticed me. Not a single muscle twitched on his face. No embarrassment, no guilt, just mild annoyance, as if I were a pesky fly that had flown in through the window. Idalene, my daughter, stood at the sink with her back to me. Her shoulders were tense, her head lowered. She was washing a cup, furiously scrubbing it with a sponge even though it had long since been clean. She knew I was here. She felt my presence, but didn't dare turn around. "Ah, Eulalia Vance. You're early," Broderick mumbled, not even attempting to stand up. "We thought the bus wouldn't get in until evening." "What is going on in the hallway?" My voice sounded quiet, but dry. This was how I usually spoke to negligent employees at the city archives who had lost an important record. "Why are my things in construction trash bags?" Broderick smirked, wiping his lips with the back of his hand. "It's not trash, it's optimization." He threw the apple core into a saucer that already held a mound of sunflower seed shells. "Sit down, Mama. We need to talk. Or rather, I need to give you some news." I didn't sit. I remained standing, leaning against the doorframe, feeling an icy rage begin to boil inside me. "Idalene!" I called out. My daughter flinched but didn't turn around. The water continued to run, drowning out her silence. "Don't touch her. She's upset. But she agrees." Broderick waved his hand dismissively. "Listen here. The situation has changed. The doctors prescribed city comfort for my mother, Vundell. She has bad joints, she needs care, the clinic is nearby, and our apartment, you know yourself, is too small for 3 people. Well, for 4, counting you." He paused, enjoying the moment like an actor on stage. "In short, Mama is moving here, into your room. It's the biggest, brightest, it'll suit her." "And me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. I knew it even before he opened his mouth. I saw the answer in the pile of bags by the door and in the cowardly back of my daughter. "And you, Eulalia Vance, are heading out to nature," my son-in-law announced solemnly. "To the ancestral home, so to speak. To the country. Fresh air, ecology, silence, beauty. Paradise for a pensioner. Idalene has already packed your things. I'll call a taxi in an hour. It'll take you straight down there." The house in the country. A lopsided wooden shotgun shack 60 miles out in rural Alabama, where there was neither gas nor running water, where the roof had been leaking for 5 years, and in winter the temperature in the rooms dropped to freezing if you didn't stoke the stove around the clock. It wasn't a house, it was a tomb. "That house is uninhabitable in winter," I said calmly. "The floors have rotted, there is no heating." "Well, summer is coming soon," Broderick chuckled, although outside the window stood a gray, damp November. "You'll patch it up. You're a strong woman, tough, from the old school." He stood up, stretched, cracking his vertebrae, and walked right up to me. He smelled of expensive cologne and rotting apples. He loomed over me, confident in his right, in his strength, in his impunity. For 10 years I had let them live here rent-free so they could get on their feet. For 10 years I endured his rudeness, his scattered socks, his loud music. I thought I was helping family. "You're old, Eulalia," he said, looking me straight in the face. His eyes were empty, like a fish's. "Why do you need so much space? 3 rooms, high ceilings. It's irrational. Be useful for once in the end. Free up the living space for the young and those who really need it. Leave. Don't force me to throw you out physically." At that moment, something clicked inside me, as if a heavy folder containing a case I had been working on for years had snapped shut. The case titled "My Family" was closed and sent to the archives for eternal storage. I looked at Idalene. She had turned off the water and froze, gripping the edge of the sink until her knuckles turned white. She heard everything, every word, and she said nothing. There were no tears. Inside me, it became empty and clear, like in a reading room before opening time. I realized these were not relatives in front of me. These were occupiers, and you don't negotiate with occupiers, you evict them. I slowly raised my eyes to Broderick. My face remained as impassive as the statues adorning the facade of our historic building. "So I'm old?" I asked quietly. "And I should be useful?" "Exactly," he smirked, mistaking my calmness for submission. "I'm glad we understand each other without hysterics." "Good," I said. "Then right now, I'm going to throw one more piece of trash out of my house." Broderick frowned, not understanding. "What trash? Idalene already packed everything." I didn't answer. I turned and walked away from the kitchen. "Hey!" he shouted at my back. "Where are you going? Your stuff is in the hall. Get dressed. The car will be here soon." I walked down the long hallway, past the black bags, past my past packed up like waste. My step was firm. I wasn't heading for the exit. I was walking deeper into the apartment, to where the hallway split. To the right were the kitchen and living room where they remained. To the left was a wide passage leading to my bedroom and study. This passage was divided by a massive oak door with stained glass, an old pre-war door that Broderick had long dreamed of tearing down to do a modern renovation and open up the space. But I hadn't allowed it. And now I knew why. "Mama!" Idaline's voice finally cut through, thin and frightened. "Mama, wait!" I reached the opening, stepped over the threshold, finding myself in the territory of my rooms, my office, my sanctuary. Broderick came out of the kitchen into the hall, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Yo, what are you plotting?" His voice became rougher. "Don't go hiding in the office, it won't help." I grabbed the heavy bronze handle of the door, turned to face them. They stood in the narrow hallway, squeezed between the walls and the bags. Broderick, red with irritation. Idaline, pale as a sheet. "I'm not hiding, Broderick," I said clearly, so every word would be imprinted in their memory. "I am taking my position." And with force, I pulled the door toward me. The heavy leaf moved smoothly. The hinges didn't even creak. I always made sure everything in my house worked properly. "Hey, what are you doing?" Broderick yelled, rushing forward. But he was too late. The door slammed in front of his nose with a dull, final thud. I instantly turned the brass thumb turn of the lock. The click of the deadbolt sounded like a gunshot. "Open up!" Broderick pounded his fist on the wood. "Are you crazy, you old hag? Open up immediately!" I leaned my back against the cool surface of the door. I felt the vibration from his blows, heard Idaline start to whimper. They were out there, in the entryway, cut off from the toilet, from the bathroom, from the bedrooms, trapped in a hallway with garbage bags they intended to be my destiny. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The air here, in this part of the apartment, was clean. It smelled of books and lavender. The war had begun, and the first move was mine. I walked away from the door without looking back. Behind me in the hallway, a storm was brewing. Broderick was pounding the oak paneling with his fists, his shouts, a mix of profanity and threats, echoing dully in the walls, like the barking of a dog locked in a basement. Idaline was whining something thinly, but I could no longer distinguish the words. To me, these sounds became just background noise, an annoyance, like the rattling of the L train outside the window, which you get used to and stop noticing. I entered my study. The same sacred twilight reigned here as always, but the air was stale. My nose, accustomed to the smell of old paper and sealing wax, caught alien notes, cheap tobacco, spilled coffee, and the Swedish stench of men's deodorant. Broderick had been making himself at home here in my absence. He sat in my chair, touched my things. This thought should have caused anger, but instead, only cold disgust came. Anger is for those who don't know what to do. And I had a plan. I walked over to the desk, pushed aside a dirty cup with a dried coffee ring, and pulled the phone toward me. My old, faithful landline with the rotary dial. The heavy black receiver fit pleasantly in my palm, its weight calming. I dialed the number from memory. The dial spun with a melodic clicking, counting down the seconds of their sentence. "Cletus?" I asked, as soon as the receiver was lifted on the other end. "It's Eulalia." The old locksmith's voice sounded raspy but warm. "You're back? I was looking. Saw lights in the windows." "I'm back, Mr. Cletus. I need your help. Grab your toolbox and come up to my place. Urgently." "Something wrong with the lock?" He became alert. "Not yet, but soon there will be. I need to change the cylinder on the front door, and I might need your muscle." "Got it," he answered briefly. "No unnecessary questions. Old school guard. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I hung up. Now I had time for the main thing. I walked to the bookcase, where behind rows of encyclopedias, a small safe was hidden, built into the wall by my late Hiram. Broderick knew of its existence, but never knew the combination. To him, it was just a metal box. To me, the heart of my home. My fingers habitually entered the combination. The small door opened silently. From the darkness of the safe, the cold of metal breathed on me. I took out a heavy iron box covered in peeling green paint. It weighed probably 6 or 7 pounds, but in my hands right now it seemed light as a feather. I placed it on the desk and threw open the lid. Here they were, my soldiers, my army. On top lay the original deed to the property. Yellowed paper with an official seal. There was only one name on it, Eulalia Vance. No shares, no co-owners. But the main weapon lay beneath it. I took out a stack of thin sheets. These were agreements for the gratuitous use of residential premises, a tenancy at will. 5 years ago, when Idalene begged me to register Broderick at this address so he could get a prestigious job, I agreed, but with a condition. As an archivist, I knew the power of a document. I made them sign these papers. They laughed back then. Broderick joked, "Mother-in-law, did you work for the FBI? Why this bureaucracy? We're family." But he signed without looking. The agreement clearly stated, right of residency is granted for a term of 1 year with the possibility of renewal only upon written consent of the owner. The last renewal ended 3 weeks ago while I was in rehab. I hadn't signed it. Legally, right now in my hallway there were no relatives. There were strangers, unlawfully occupying someone else's living space. The banging on the door became less frequent, but stronger. Apparently, Broderick was trying to ram the lock with his shoulder. Fool! This door survived the riots of '68. It would survive his tantrum. I tore a sheet from a notepad and picked up a pen. My handwriting was even, calligraphic, without a single tremor. You have 45 minutes to pack your personal belongings. In 45 minutes, a locksmith will arrive to change the locks. If you do not leave voluntarily, I will call the police and present documents regarding your unlawful presence in the apartment. Time starts now. I walked to the door, separating me from the screaming chaos, crouched down and slid the note through the slit under the threshold. Silence fell on the other side. They saw the paper. I heard rustling, then Idalene's whisper reading aloud. 45 minutes, she muttered, and real terror sounded in her voice. "To hell with her!" Broderick roared. "The old hag is bluffing. She won't do anything. Idalene, break the door down. Help me!" But no more blows followed. They were scared, not of the police. They were scared of my precision. Broderick knew if I named a time, it meant the mechanism was already in motion. I returned to the desk to put the documents back in the box. But my gaze caught on the mess my son-in-law had made on the desktop. He had shoved my folders aside to make room for his laptop, which wasn't here right now, and had swept some mail into a pile. I mechanically started to tidy up. Habit. Chaos in documents, chaos in the mind. I picked up a stack of envelopes, intending to move them to the edge. And then I froze. These weren't my letters. And these weren't utility bills, which usually came in simple white envelopes. This was a stack of thick, official letters with red stamps. Urgent, and deliver to addressee only. Addressee, Broderick, Washington. I knew that reading other people's mail was bad manners, but Broderick had just declared war on me, and in war, intelligence is everything. I put on my glasses, took the top envelope. It was already opened, roughly torn at the side. I pulled out the sheet. The logo of a bank, a large commercial one. The lines jumped out at me, forming a ruthless picture. Dear borrower, in connection with systematic violation of the payment schedule, foreclosure procedure. I set the sheet aside and picked up the next one. Unopened, I carefully tore the edge. Notice of default. Warehouse premises at the address. Retail point number 4. My hands went cold, but my mind began working at double speed. Broderick always bragged about his business. Logistics, imports, prospects. He said things were going uphill, that soon they would buy a suburban cottage. I went through the rest of the letters. The debt amounts were astronomical, the dates fresh. The last letter was from a collection agency. The tone there was no longer corporate polite. I raised my eyes and looked at the locked door. So that's what it is. Vondel isn't moving here because she needs care. And I'm being kicked out to a rotten shack, not because they are cramped. Broderick is bankrupt. He lost everything. His warehouse, his goods, his prospects. He has nowhere to put his own mother because... A terrible guess pierced me. Most likely, her housing is also somehow involved in this financial pit. He didn't come here as an owner expanding his domain. He came like a rat cornered, looking for any hole to hide in. And to save his own hide, he decided to feed me to this pit. I neatly stacked the letters back up. Now this wasn't just trash on my table. It was a trump card that beat any card of his. I still had half an hour until Cletus arrived, and now I knew exactly what I would say when I opened that door. The crash of metal tore through the silence of the study like a gunshot. The bronze handle, which had served faithfully for half a century, twisted out of its socket with a pitiful screech. The door flew open, hitting the wall so hard that fine plaster dust rained down from the ceiling. Broderick flew into the room, breathing heavily, red, sweaty, with a triumphant glint in his eyes. In his hand, he clutched not the broken handle, but a sheet of paper folded in four. Behind his back, in the shadows of the hallway, Idaline huddled, not daring to cross the threshold of my refuge. 45 minutes, he exhaled, and his lips stretched into a crooked smirk. You scare me with time, old woman. You think you are the law here? He walked to my desk, kicking a chair that stood in his way. I didn't flinch. My hands lay calmly on the tabletop, covering the stack of letters he didn't know about yet. I am the law here, he barked, slamming his sheet onto the tabletop right in front of my nose with a swing. Can you still read, or has senility finally eaten your brain? I slanted my eyes at the paper. It was a power of attorney. Remember last winter? His voice oozed venom and self-satisfaction. Flu, fever of 103. You were lying flat, delirious. I brought you broth and gave you papers to sign. For processing subsidies, remember? I remembered. The sticky heat, the fog in my head, and the insistent voice of my son-in-law. Sign here, Mama Eulalia. It's a formality so we can pay for the apartment while you're sick. This is a general power of attorney, Broderick announced triumphantly, poking a finger at the official seal. With the right to dispose of all property, all of it, including this dump, so legally I can throw you out of here right now, even through the window. I am your guardian. You are an incompetent dependent. He turned to the door where his wife stood. Idaline, why are you frozen? Drag the bags to the car and bring her coat. It's not May outside. We are leaving right now. Idaline took a timid step forward. Her eyes darted around, avoiding meeting mine. Broderick, maybe we shouldn't be so rough, she began in a trembling voice. We have to, he cut her off. She doesn't understand the nice way. She thought she could threaten us. I slowly, demonstratively slowly, reached for my eyeglass case, took them out, wiped the lenses with the edge of my wool shawl, and perched them on my nose. Go ahead, read, Broderick laughed. Look for commas, you damn archivist. I picked up the sheet. The paper was cheap, gray. The text was typed with typos. I ran my eyes over the lines. I entrust citizen Broderick Washington to manage and dispose. Yes, the wording was standard. To an amateur, they looked frighteningly convincing. But I wasn't an amateur. I had been the keeper of city records for 40 years. I knew the value of every squiggle. Idaline, stop, I said without raising my head. My daughter froze. Why are you commanding her? Broderick flared up. Broderick. I took off my glasses and looked at him over the lenses. My voice was level, like the horizon line. When you drew up this paper, you seemed to have skimped on money. What? He blinked, thrown off by my tone. The notary, I explained, tapping my finger on the purple stamp at the bottom of the page. Name is Pupkin. That's the guy who sits in the check-cashing joint by the market who charges $20 and asks no questions. What difference does it make? He snorted, but worry flickered in his eyes. The seal is there. Your signature is there. The difference, my dear, is in the state statutes regarding real estate transactions. I spoke as if lecturing a negligent student. Transactions for the alienation of real property, as well as powers of attorney implying such actions for persons of retirement age, are subject to mandatory certification by a notary specifically licensed for real estate transfers, often requiring 2 witnesses. This Mr. Pupkin is barely licensed to notarize a gym membership. I neatly placed the paper back on the table as if it were a used napkin. This piece of paper is good for picking up a package of wool socks for me at the post office, but you cannot evict me or sell my condo with it. Any court, hell, any rookie police officer would laugh in your face. You saved $50 on fees, Broderick, and you lost. A ringing silence hung in the room. Broderick stood with his mouth open. His face slowly began to fill with a crimson color. He shifted his gaze from me to the paper, trying to realize that his trump ace turned out to be a joker. You "You're lying," he wheezed, but there was no confidence in his voice anymore. "Call a lawyer," I suggested. "Oh, that's right, you don't have money for a lawyer." He clenched his fists, his nostrils flaring. I saw blind animal rage boiling up in him. He stepped toward me, raising his hand to strike, to crumple the paper. But at that moment, the apartment was pierced by the trill of the doorbell, long, insistent, demanding. Broderick froze. His hand hung in the air. "The cops," he exhaled, paling sharply. "Did you call the cops?" I didn't have time to answer. Idalene, happy for an excuse to escape this stifling room, rushed to the entryway. "I'll get it." We heard the lock of the front door click. Broderick tensed, ready for defense, but instead of a stern Officer Johnson, a loud, shrill female voice came from the hallway, filling the entire space of the apartment instantly, like spilled boiling water. "Well, finally. Idalene, why so long? I've been ringing and ringing. Your elevator isn't working. Had to drag suitcases up to the second floor myself. Where is Broderick? Why is no one meeting me?" Broderick exhaled and his shoulders slumped. It wasn't the police. It was worse. Vondel appeared in the doorway of the study. She was monumental. In a voluminous coat, the color of overripe cherries, in a huge fur hat, despite the wet November slush, she took up the entire passage. Behind her, breathing heavily, Idalene dragged 2 giant plaid laundry bags. Vondel swept her gaze over the wrecked office, the overturned chair, the broken door handle, me standing by the desk, and Broderick, red and disheveled. Her small, beady eyes stopped on me, on my simple house dress, on my hands stained with printer dust from old letters. She didn't see the hostess. In her picture of the world, she was already the mistress here. "Ah, so you've already started." She nodded with satisfaction, pulling off her gloves. "Good job. Broderick organized the process." She stepped toward me and shoved her wet leather gloves into my hands. "Why are you standing there, honey?" She barked at me, as if I were deaf. "See, the lady has arrived. Come on, move it. Clean up this mess and put the kettle on." "And these boxes?" She waved her hand toward my archive folders on the shelves. "Carry them out faster. I need space for my figurines." Broderick covered his face with his hands, and I looked at the strange gloves in my palms. They were cold and damp. "Of course," I said quietly, and the corner of my lips twitched. "We'll arrange everything right now. Tea will be very appropriate." Broderick raised eyes full of horror at me. He understood. I wasn't going to dissuade his mother. Not yet. I was going to play this game to destroy him completely. I carefully placed Vondel's wet leather gloves on the edge of the dresser, trying not to let them touch the polished wood surface. It became unbearably crowded in the entryway. The in-law took up so much space, as if a whole traveling circus had barged into the apartment with her. She was unbuttoning her coat, simultaneously shouting instructions to Idalene, who, bent double, was trying to drag the bags into the living room. "Careful with that bag, the china is in there," Vondel thundered. "And don't put it on the floor, there's a draft. Put it on the sofa." Broderick darted between us like a snake on a hot skillet. Sweat rolled down his temples in large drops, getting stuck in his stubble. He grabbed me by the elbow, squeezing my fingers painfully. "Okay, that's it. The circus is over," he hissed in my ear, spraying saliva. "Mama is here. No need to fray her nerves. Get dressed and get out. The car is waiting. Idalene will bring out your things." I slowly, with icy calm, freed my arm. Animal fear splashed in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of what might happen if his mother and I talked for longer than 5 minutes. "Broderick, fear God," I said loudly enough for my voice to cover the rustling of bags. "Your mother has traveled a long way. She's tired, frozen, and you're kicking out the hostess without even giving the guests tea? What kind of manners are those?" Vondel froze, having already taken one arm out of her coat sleeve. She looked at her son with suspicion. "That's true, Rick," she boomed. "Why are you acting like you've been scalded? Let me catch my breath. I came from the train. My back is aching. And anyway, I want to inspect my domain." The words, "my domain," grated on my ears, but I didn't show it. I just smiled meekly, accepting the role they had assigned me. The role of an old senile squatter living out her last hours in the Lord's house. "Come into the kitchen, Vondel," I invited, gesturing the way. "I just brewed some fresh tea, with mint." "With mint," she grunted, walking past me like a boss and brushing my shoulder. "Fine, it'll do. Just don't make it strong. I have blood pressure." We moved to the kitchen. The space I loved for its morning silence and light now seemed tiny and stifling. Vondel flopped onto my chair, the one by the window where I like to read in the mornings, and the chair creaked pitifully under her weight. Broderick remained standing in the doorway, blocking the exit like a prison guard. He nervously fingered the buttons on his shirt, and I saw his gaze darting from his mother to me and back. I took the guest cups out of the buffet, thin imperial china, a wedding gift from my parents. They jingled in my hands, not from trembling. My hands were steady as stone, but from contact with the saucers. "Well," Vondel exhaled, looking around the kitchen with a critical eye. "Ceilings are high, that's good, but the renovation, of course, is ancient. This floral wallpaper— Rick, I told you we should have hired a crew immediately while I was packing." "Ma, later, all later," Broderick spoke quickly, taking a step toward me as if he wanted to take the kettle away. "Eulalia Vance is in a hurry. She has a bus." "What bus?" Vondel was surprised, taking the cup from my hands. "Isn't she— Aren't you driving her? You said everything would be with comfort. You said in a car." In a car," he hastily corrected himself. "The taxi is waiting. The meter is ticking." I slowly poured boiling water into the teapot. The aroma of herbs floated through the kitchen, creating a deceptive atmosphere of coziness. I sat opposite Vondel, ignoring the desperate signs my son-in-law was making behind her back. He drew his hand across his throat, widened his eyes, mouthing soundlessly, "Get out." But I wasn't going anywhere. "You know, Vondel," I began in a polite tone, pushing the bowl of cookies toward her, "I just can't understand. You had such a wonderful house down in Selma. I remember the photo Adeline showed me. River nearby, garden, lilacs under the windows. Why do you need this noisy city in your old age? The air here is heavy, cars honking." Broderick twitched as if he had received an electric shock. "Mama, don't listen to her, she's blabbering," he shouted. "Eulalia, get up." But Vondel had already bitten into a cookie and, having chewed, stared at me with sincere bewilderment. A strange, childish confusion flickered in her small eyes. "What house, honey?" she asked, brushing crumbs off her immense chest. "I don't have a house in Selma anymore." I took a small sip of tea, looking at her over the cup. "How come?" I asked softly. "Sold it? But you lived there all your life. Broderick said you love your land very much." "I do, of course." Vondel's voice trembled. Offense seeped into it. "Only Rick said it was necessary for the family. Said enough for you, Mama, breaking your back in the garden. Said he found an option. In the center, huge palace." She waved her hand around the kitchen. He said, "Mama, we sell your shack, add my savings from the business, and buy the apartment from the mother-in-law." Such silence hung in the kitchen that you could hear water dripping from the faucet. Drip, drip, drip. I slowly placed the cup on the saucer. The china clinked quietly. Broderick froze in the doorway. He stopped breathing. His face turned the color of old plaster. Gray, lifeless. Adeline, standing behind him in the hallway, covered her mouth with her palm. "Buying? From me?" I asked very quietly, so every word pierced this silence like a nail. "Well, yes." Vondel frowned, starting to sense something was wrong. She looked at her son, then at me. "Rick said you want to move to the country, to your roots, and you're selling the condo. So he sold my house quickly, for peanuts almost, just to close the deal in time. He transferred the money to you last week, as I understood." She fell silent, looking at my face. There was no joy from the deal on it, nor understanding. "Rick." Vondel's voice became lower, dangerous. "Rick, why is she looking at me like that?" I shifted my gaze to my son-in-law. Now all the pieces of the mosaic fell into place. The letters from the bank, the debts, the urgent move of his mother. He didn't just want to kick me out, he robbed his own mother. He sold her only home, her refuge, to cover his burning loans, and spun her a fairy tale that he was buying my apartment for her. He had made us both homeless. "So you bought the apartment," I drawled, keeping my eyes on Broderick, who seemed to have shrunk to half his size. "And the money from the house by the river went to pay for this apartment." "Well, of course!" Vondel barked, starting to get angry from the incomprehensible tension. $150,000. "Rick, why are you silent? Kat got your tongue? Explain to her." I stood up slowly, leaning my hands on the table. I felt a wave of cold, punishing power rising inside me. This was no longer resentment. This was justice. "Vondel," I said clearly, "I did not receive any money. I did not sell this apartment, and I was not planning to sell it." Vondel dropped her cookie. It fell into the tea, splashing brown droplets. "What?" she whispered. "Your son," I pointed a finger at the trembling man in the doorway, "is bankrupt. He is drowning in debt. He stole your house, Vondel. He sold it to pay his debts, and he brought you here hoping to kick me out onto the street and settle you here for free." I looked straight into my son-in-law's eyes. "Tell her, Broderick. Tell your mother where her money is." Vondel slowly, heavily rose from the chair. Her face began to fill with a terrible crimson color. She turned to her son. In that second, Broderick realized that the locked door and my threats were flowers. The real hell for him began only now. A ringing slap lashed the air, drowning out even the hum of the refrigerator. Broderick's head snapped to the side, and a crimson print of a heavy palm instantly appeared on his cheek. "Thief!" Vondel roared, and such rage bubbled in her voice that the glass in the china cabinet trembled. "Robbed your own mother! Where is the money, Judas? Where is my 150 grand?" Broderick recoiled, hitting his back against the doorframe. His hands were shaking. He put them out in front of him as if protecting himself from a bear. "Mama, calm down! It's temporary!" he squealed, his voice cracking into falsetto. "It's investments, working capital. I'll return everything with interest. By summer, by summer!" Vondel grabbed a towel from the table and swung it like a whip. "And where am I supposed to live until summer? At the train station? You said the apartment was bought. You said it was mine." At that moment, Adeline spoke up. She was standing in the corner of the kitchen, white as chalk, picking at the hem of her gray sweater. The meaning of what was happening finally reached her. "Broderick," she whispered, and her voice, usually quiet and submissive, suddenly rang with horror. "If you sold Mama's house, and if this apartment isn't ours, then we have nowhere to go." She raised tear-filled eyes to her husband. "We are homeless, Broderick. You made us homeless." Broderick looked around wildly. On one side, an enraged mother was advancing on him, ready to tear him apart with her bare hands. On the other, a sobbing wife, realizing the collapse of her entire life. And in the middle sat I, calm, back straight, sipping cooling tea. I was a witness to his shame. I was the mirror in which he saw his true face, the face of a loser and a fraud. And he chose the easiest target. His fear transformed into aggression, and he turned to me. "This is your fault," he growled, and his face twisted into a vicious grimace. "Sat there, kept quiet, digging under me. You old witch." He stepped toward the table, looming over me. His shadow fell on my face. "You think you're the smartest here?" He slammed his fist on the table so hard the cups jumped. "I don't give a damn about your papers. I am the man here. I am the master here. As long as I am in this house, my word is law. And you?" He poked a finger at me. "You will sign whatever I say right now, or I won't be responsible for my actions." The kitchen went quiet. Adeline sobbed. Vondel froze with the raised towel, watching the scene. Physical threat. That was an argument they all understood. Broderick was young, strong, and driven to despair. I didn't flinch. I didn't even move away. I simply reached for the phone that lay next to the sugar bowl and pressed the speakerphone button. "Who are you calling?" he barked, trying to snatch the receiver, but I covered the device with my palm. "Call the cops. Go ahead. Let them take me. I'll tell them you came at me with a knife." "Not the police, Broderick," I answered coldly, dialing the last number from the call list I had saved in the device's memory half an hour ago when studying his letters. "I am calling Prosperity Bank." The ringing tone went loud, echoing off the tiled walls. Broderick froze. "Good afternoon. You have reached the Distressed Debt Department." A soulless mechanical voice sounded from the speaker, followed by a click of switching. "Operator Simmons speaking." "Hello?" I spoke clearly, looking straight into my son-in-law's eyes. "My name is Eulalia Vance. I am the owner of the condo at 42 Martin Luther King Drive, Unit 3B. I have in my hands a foreclosure notice addressed to citizen Broderick Washington." "What are you doing?" Broderick hissed, turning pale. "Hang up." "1 minute verifying information," the woman on the other end answered. Typing was heard. "Yes, I see. The borrower attempted to secure a loan against this property 3 months ago." "Tell me," I asked. "Did I, as the owner, give consent to this transaction?" "No." The operator's voice became harder. "A power of attorney was included in the document package, but our security department flagged it as suspicious. The loan against the apartment was denied. The borrower was issued only an unsecured personal loan at a high interest rate, which is currently in default. Furthermore, we are preparing to transfer materials to the district attorney regarding attempted mortgage fraud." The words district attorney and fraud hung in the air like heavy smog. I pressed the disconnect button. "You're not just bankrupt, Broderick," I said in the deadly silence. "You're a felon. You tried to mortgage my home with a fake piece of paper, but you couldn't even manage that." Vondel slowly sank onto a chair, clutching her heart. Idalene covered her face with her hands. Broderick stood, breathing heavily. He was cornered completely, and then he snapped. "Ah, you bitch!" he roared, losing human semblance. "Decided to destroy me? I'll show you right now." He lunged at me. His huge hands reached for my throat. I saw madness in his eyes, saw that he was ready to hit, ready to strangle, just to silence this voice of truth. I wouldn't have had time to stand up. But in that second, the front door, which Vondel in her haste had left unlocked, swung wide open. "Hey! Easy there!" A deep bass voice rang out. In the hallway appeared the figure of Mr. Cletus. He stood in his work jacket with a toolbox in one hand, but he wasn't alone. Next to him, taking up the entire doorway, stood 2 of our neighbors from the 3rd floor, the Booker brothers, huge, broad-shouldered guys who worked as longshoremen. I had known them since they were in diapers, treated them to pies when they were boys. Now they looked at Broderick with heavy, unkind gazes. "Miss Eula, you got problems?" Cletus asked calmly, stepping over the threshold and toying with a heavy pipe wrench. Titus, the older brother, cracked his knuckles and stepped forward, shielding me. "We heard screaming," he boomed. "Who's raising their voice at Miss Eula? Not this passenger, is it?" Broderick froze. His hands, reaching for my throat, dropped powerlessly. He looked at the 3 strong men, then at me. All his arrogance evaporated, leaving only sticky, pathetic fear. I slowly rose from the chair, adjusted the collar of my dress, and looked at my son-in-law over Titus's shoulder. "Mr. Cletus," I said evenly, "it's too early to change the lock. First, we need to take out the trash. All the trash." Broderick stepped back, hitting his back against the refrigerator door. His gaze darted between Titus Booker's heavy fists and my calm face. All his fake bravado, all those shouts about being the master, slid off him like cheap paint in the rain, exposing a slippery, rotten essence. "Eulalia Vance!" he whined, and his voice trembled, breaking into a pathetic whisper. "Don't! Not in front of the neighbors. Why air dirty laundry? We're family." He folded his hands on his chest in a pleading gesture, forgetting that a minute ago he wanted to strangle me with those same hands. "I tried for us!" He suddenly shouted, turning to Titus as if seeking sympathy from him. Brothers, you gotta understand. Business is a risk. I wanted us to live like people, for Idaline to have a fur coat, for Mama to go to the ocean. I thought I'd flip the money, close the debts, no one would even know. It's all for the family. Tears, real, large tears of self-pity, rolled down his unshaven cheeks. He looked disgusting, not like a man who suffered a crash, but like a naughty schoolboy who broke a window and fears his father's belt. Don't ruin me, Miss Eulalia. He would have fallen to his knees if the kitchen hadn't been so cramped. Don't shame me. I'll work it off. I'll return everything. Just don't kick me out now at night. I looked at him and felt nothing but disgust, as if I stepped in a puddle. You didn't try for the family, Broderick, I said quietly. You tried for your vanity. You wanted to seem rich without knowing how to earn a dime, and for this, you sold your mother's house and wanted to mortgage mine. At this moment, Vondel, who had been sitting in a stupor until now, suddenly came to life. The realization that her son was not just a loser, but a thief who deprived her of a roof over her head, finally broke through the armor of her self-satisfaction. But instead of being horrified by what he had done, she, just like him, thought only of herself. She rose heavily, pushing Broderick with her hip so that he hit his elbow on the microwave. "What can you expect from him, the fool?" she barked, turning to me. "Eulalia, you see, he confused me, deceived his own mother. What do I have to do with it? I am a victim." She stepped toward me, extending her hands. Her face took on an expression of insulted virtue. "I am an elderly woman, sick. I have hypertension. Where will I go? There is no house in Selma. Strangers live there. You have no right to kick me out on the street. I will stay here until this idiot finds a solution. Give me a room, I won't bother you. We, old women, must stick together against these—" She poked a finger toward her son. I looked at her, at this heavy, imperious woman who half an hour ago commanded me in my own house, demanding tea and pointing out where to put her figurines. I saw right through her. She didn't pity me. She didn't even pity her son. She was just looking for a new host to leech onto. "No, Vondel," I cut her off. My voice sounded firm, like the strike of a judge's gavel. She froze, not believing her ears. "What?" "No, you are not a victim." I walked right up to her, looking straight into her small, mean eyes. "You are the root. You raised him like this. All his life you instilled in him that he is special, that everyone owes him. You taught him to take, but didn't teach him to give. You raised a thief, Vondel." I took a breath, feeling my heart pounding in my chest, but outwardly remaining an icy cliff. In my house there is no place for thieves or for those who spawned them. "How dare you! How dare you!" she gasped, grabbing at the air with her mouth. "I am a guest!" "You are not a guest." I shook my head. "You are an accomplice. Cletus?" The old locksmith immediately stepped forward. "Yes, Miss Eula?" "Escort the citizens to the exit. Help carry the things to the stairwell, and if they resist, Titus and his brother will help." The Booker brothers silently, synchronously, crossed their arms on their chests. Their biceps strained the fabric of their sweaters. Broderick swallowed, pulling his head into his shoulders. Vondel turned purple, opened her mouth to spew a curse, but looked at the grim faces of the neighbors and cut herself short. Animal fear of force turned out to be stronger than her arrogance. "Get ready," Broderick muttered to his mother, grabbing his jacket. "Let's go." They began to bustle. It was a pathetic sight. Vondel grabbed a half-eaten cookie from the table, shoving it into her pocket. Broderick tried to zip his jacket with shaking hands. Cletus and the boys stood as a silent convoy, watching the dirt being swept out of my apartment. I stood by the window, turned away from them. I looked at the gray courtyard, at the bare branches of the poplar tree. Inside, it was empty and ringing. I did what I had to do. I protected my home. But there was one person left. Idaline. My daughter had stood by the sink this whole time, turning into a shadow. She hadn't uttered a word while I scolded her husband and mother-in-law. I waited. My heart, despite the armor, shrank into a tiny ball of hope. I thought, now Now she will come up. She will say, "Mama, forgive me. I'm staying. I won't go with them. I'll help you clean up this mess." I heard her steps behind my back, timid, shuffling. She came up to me. I turned around. Idaline stood with her head down. Her shoulders were slumped. Her face was tear-stained, mascara smeared in black circles under her eyes. She looked 10 years older. She didn't look me in the eye. Her gaze wandered over the floor, over the pattern of the parquet. "Mama," she said quietly. "Yes, Idaline?" I leaned forward, ready to hug her, ready to forgive if she just took that step. She sniffled, convulsively clutching her handbag. "Broderick's cards are blocked," she whispered. And every word was difficult for her. "And I don't have cash. Mama, give me money for a hotel. Just for a couple of days. We have nowhere to go." The world tilted. I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. Before me stood not a victim. Before me stood a woman who had just seen her husband rob her mother, try to strangle me, lie and squirm. And she didn't leave him. She didn't choose me. She chose to be with him, but at my expense. Hope died instantly, quietly and painlessly. Only clarity remained. "Money?" I asked again. "Well, yes." She finally raised eyes to me in which timid pleading shone. "We're on the street, Mama. Have pity. We aren't strangers after all." I straightened to my full height. "No," I said. Idaline blinked. "What, Mama? But how? You won't kick us out without a penny?" "I don't give charity to those who tried to rob me." My voice sounded dry, like the rustle of old paper. "You stood here, Idaline. You stood and watched as he packed my books into trash bags. You were silent when he yelled at me. You knew about the house in the country, about the fact that it's uninhabitable, and you were ready to send me there to die, just not to cross him." "I was afraid," she sobbed. "You made your choice," I interrupted her. "You chose his comfort, not my life. So go follow him, share his fate, pay for his mistakes yourself." "Mama," she reached out her hand to me. "Leave." I turned back to the window. "And forget this address until you remember what conscience is." I heard her stand behind my back for another second, breathing heavily, and then she turned and walked away. The front door slammed. It became quiet in the apartment. Only I, Cletus, and two sturdy guys carrying out strange suitcases remained. But I knew this wasn't the end yet. Broderick wouldn't give up that easily. A rat-cornered bites to the last, but the silence turned out to be deceptive. The slam of the door echoed off the walls, but when I turned around expecting to see an empty entryway, my heart skipped a beat from irritation. Broderick hadn't left. He took advantage of the delay when Titus was carrying out Vondel's suitcases and darted back into the depths of the room. Now he was sitting on my sofa in the living room, legs spread wide and gripping the armrests with whitened fingers. His face was twisted with desperate, malicious determination. He resembled a tick that had dug into the skin and couldn't be torn off without leaving the head inside. "I'm not going anywhere," he hissed, looking at me from under his brows. "You won't scare me with your muscle heads, old woman." Cletus, returning from the hallway, frowned and stepped toward him, toying with the wrench. "You need a special invitation, son?" the locksmith boomed. "You were told to exit." "You have no right!" Broderick squealed, and hysterical notes appeared in his voice. "I know the laws. I've lived here for 10 years. 10 years, do you hear? This is my permanent place of residence. You cannot throw me out on the street without a court order." He looked triumphantly at me, confident he had found a loophole. "Call the police," he yelled, spraying saliva. "Let them file a report. This is a civil dispute. Court will take 6 months, and while the proceedings are going on, no one has the right to evict me. I receive mail here. That means I live here. De facto, I have tenant rights." The Booker brothers, returning for the next batch of things, exchanged glances. They were simple workers and didn't know the subtleties of the housing code. The words court and rights made them freeze uncertainly. No one wanted to get involved with a felony if the law was really on the side of this parasite. Broderick noticed their confusion and broke into a smile, "Ha, gotcha," he laughed, feeling the swing tilt in his direction. "So, Eulalia Vance, bring a pillow. I'll sleep here, and we'll see who survives whom." I looked at him with icy calm. He thought he was playing chess, but he didn't even know how the pieces moved. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. I walked to my desk, where the heavy iron box I had taken from the safe an hour ago still stood. Broderick watched my movements warily. I extracted from the stack that very folder, which he, in his arrogance, had signed many years ago without even reading. "You're right, Broderick," I said, returning to the center of the room and opening the document. "If you were simply a tenant I let in out of the kindness of my heart, evicting you would be difficult. A court order would be required." I put on my glasses and looked at him over the frames. "But you forgot that your mother-in-law is an archivist. I love precision in wording. Remember this agreement?" I turned the sheet so he could see his sweeping signature at the bottom. "Agreement of short-term gratuitous use of residential premises." I read aloud, enunciating every word. Clause 4.2. The right of use is granted for a term of 1 calendar month and is subject to mandatory written renewal by the owner on the last day of the current month. In the absence of the owner's signature on the Renewal Act, the agreement is considered terminated and the right of use lost from the first day of the following month. Silence hung in the room, heavy as a tombstone. The smile slid off Broderick's face, replaced by an expression of animal terror. "Today," I continued ruthlessly, "is the 22nd. I spent the last month in rehab. What do you think, Broderick? Did I sign the Renewal Act for this month?" I showed him the blank column in the addendum to the agreement. "No." I slammed the folder shut. The sound was like a gunshot. "Legally, Broderick, you haven't lived here for 3 weeks. You have no lease, no agreement, no verbal permission from the owner. From the point of view of the law, you are a stranger unlawfully trespassing in my dwelling and refusing to leave. You are not a tenant. You are an intruder." I turned to Cletus and the Booker brothers. "Boys," I said calmly, "there is a stranger in my apartment threatening my safety. This isn't an eviction. This is self-defense and protection of private property. Remove him from here." Titus's face brightened. He didn't need courts. He needed simple, understandable justice. "Ah, well, you should have said so straight away, Miss Eula," he boomed, taking a step toward the sofa. "All that rights code stuff." "Don't come near me!" Broderick shrieked, pressing into the back of the sofa. "I'll complain!" But Titus had already bent down and, grabbing him by the collar of his jacket, yanked him to his feet like a naughty kitten. Broderick kicked his legs, trying to hook onto the rug, the table leg, the air. "Let go! Idaline, tell them!" he wailed as they dragged him to the exit. They dragged him through the hallway, past those same black bags in which he had packed my life. I walked behind, holding the folder with documents like a sword. At the very front door, when Titus had already kicked it open, Broderick suddenly twisted. His gaze fell on the antique vanity in the entryway. There, on a velvet napkin, lay a small mahogany jewelry box. My jewelry box, nothing super expensive, a couple of gold rings, silver earrings with turquoise, an old garnet brooch inherited from my grandmother. In Broderick's eyes, a last mad spark of greed flared up. "I need money," he yelled, tearing his hand from the neighbor's grip. "I need money for a hotel. It's compensation." He lunged at the vanity, grabbed the box, couldn't hold it in shaking hands, and dropped the contents. Jewelry scattered across the floor. Whining, he fell to his knees, trying to rake the gold into his pocket along with the dust. "Don't touch that!" Cletus shouted, rushing toward him. But Broderick had already grabbed a handful of chains and the brooch, trying to break through to the door. And then a shadow blocked his path. On the threshold, on the landing, stood Idaline. She hadn't gone to the street. She stood there, leaning against the railing next to her mother-in-law's suitcases, listening to her husband being thrown out of the apartment. Broderick ran into her, trying to squeeze past. "Move, you fool!" he barked, trying to push his wife aside with his shoulder. "Let's go!" In his fist, my garnet brooch was clutched. Idaline looked at his hand, then at his face twisted with malice. In her eyes, always so submissive, so dull, suddenly something changed. As if a fuse that had held back the voltage for years blew inside. She didn't move away. She intercepted his hand. Her fingers, thin musical fingers, dug into his wrist with a death grip. "Give it back," she said quietly. "What are you doing?" Broderick was taken aback. "Let go! We'll have nothing to eat! It's money! It's your mother's!" Idaline's voice trembled, but steel appeared in it, which I had never heard before. "You already stole Mama's house. You won't steal my Mama's memories." She yanked his hand toward herself, and with strength I didn't suspect she had, pried his fingers open. The brooch and chains fell with a ring onto the tiled floor of the hallway. Broderick froze, looking at his wife as if she had grown a second head. For the first time in 10 years of marriage, she didn't hand him the ammo. She knocked the weapon from his hands. "You," he rasped. "You're against me?" "I'm against thievery," Idaline answered, looking him straight in the eye. "Go, Broderick. Go alone." Titus, taking advantage of the moment, planted his palm in the son-in-law's back and forcefully shoved him onto the stairs. Broderick flew a couple of yards, nearly knocking over Vondel standing below, and crashed into the railing. "Get out," Cletus barked. Broderick raised his head. He looked at us all, at me standing in the doorway of my fortress, at Cletus with the wrench, at the grim neighbor brothers, and finally at Idaline, who stood before him blocking the entrance. He spat on the floor, cursed dirtily and long, and began descending the stairs, dragging his malice with him. But I knew it was too early to put a period. Idaline stood on the threshold, and her choice wasn't fully made yet. I stood in the doorway and watched as the Booker brothers carried the last bags of books back into the entryway. The heavy, strained breathing of the movers and the shuffling of soles were the only sounds in the apartment. The echo of the scandal was gone. It had weathered away along with the draft when Cletus finally slammed the door and turned the key in the new, freshly installed lock. "That's it, Miss Eula," he said, handing me a ring of shiny keys smelling of oil. "Now you couldn't drive a tank in here. I installed a German cylinder with an armor plate. Sleep tight." I squeezed the cold metal in my palm. It burned, but it was a pleasant pain, the pain of returned power. "Thank you, Mr. Cletus," I answered quietly. "And thank you, boys. If it weren't for you—" "Oh, come on, Miss Eula." Titus waved it off, wiping sweat from his forehead. "If that moron shows up again, just whistle. We'll rearrange his legs in the opposite direction real quick." They left, refusing tea and money. I was left alone. Silence reigned in the apartment. But it wasn't that dead, frightening emptiness I feared. It was the silence of a library after closing, full, deep, filled with wisdom and peace. I slowly walked down the hallway, touching the spines of the books that lay on the small table again, not in trash bags. My house breathed again, but I needed to see the finale with my own eyes. The period. I threw a shawl over my shoulders and went out onto the balcony. The evening city was already covered with a gray, damp blanket of twilight. Streetlights lit up, reflecting in the wet asphalt in yellow spots. Below, near the entrance, an engine purred. Broderick's car stood there, puffing clouds of white smoke. I saw Vondel, already sitting in the front seat, gesturing furiously, poking a finger toward my windows. Even through the glass and distance, I felt the vibration of her curses. Broderick was fussily stuffing the last bags into the trunk, looking back at the entrance door every now and then as if expecting a chase. And then I saw Idaline. She came out of the building last. Slowly, as if her legs were filled with lead. She didn't look up at the balcony where I stood. She walked to the car. Broderick shouted something to her, rudely waving his hand, inviting her to sit in the back. She froze for a second, grabbing the door handle, and then slipped inside the cabin. The car jerked sharply from the spot, screeching tires and blinking red taillights dissolved into the stream of evening traffic. I remained standing, clutching the cold railing. The wind ruffled my gray hair. She left with him, despite everything, despite the theft, the humiliation, the fact that he deprived her mother-in-law of a home and tried to deprive me. The habit of being a victim turned out to be stronger than pride. My heart shrank, turning into a small, dry walnut. I won the war for the apartment but lost my daughter. I returned to the room and tightly closed the balcony door, cutting off the street noise. "Well then, Eulalia," I said to myself aloud. The voice sounded firm. "Life goes on." I went to the kitchen. Habitual movements calmed me. Pour water into the kettle, get the tin of tea, throw in a pinch of mint. While the water boiled, I looked at the empty chair where Vondel had recently sat, demanding worship. Now it was empty. I brewed strong tea, dark as amber, and with the cup in my hands went into my study. I sat in my favorite leather armchair, feeling its upholstery take the shape of my body. I was alone, absolutely alone, in a huge 3-bedroom apartment. My gaze fell on the phone. The thought came instantly, clear and pure. Broderick was right about one thing. One person doesn't need so much space. But he was wrong in his conclusions. This space isn't for parasites. This space is for salvation. I picked up the receiver and dialed a number I knew by heart from my volunteer work days. Hope Crisis Center evening shift. Listening. "Hello, Lena," I said. "This is Eulalia Vance." "Yes, the archivist." "Lena, listen to me carefully. I have a room available. Big, bright. If you have a woman, someone who needs to hide, who has nowhere to go tonight, send her. Yes, free of charge indefinitely. Main thing is that she needs peace. I'm waiting." I hung up. My soul felt lighter. I wasn't going to live out my days as an old maid in a museum. I would make my home a fortress for those who, like me, decided not to be victims anymore. I took a sip of tea and was about to pick up a book when suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something near the threshold of the study. In the twilight of the hallway, where the mountain of trash bags used to tower, lay a lonely object. I frowned. Did they forget something? Or did Cletus drop a tool? I got up, walked closer, and turned on the hallway light. On the floor lay a woman's handbag, a worn beige faux leather bag, Idaline's bag. My heart beat faster. Why is it here? She got in the car. I saw her get in. Did she leave it in the confusion when she was wresting my jewelry away from Broderick? But how would she leave without documents? Without money? I picked up the bag. It was light. I unzipped it. There was no wallet inside, no ID. Lying there was only a sheet of paper folded in two, torn from a school notebook, and a set of keys. Keys to Broderick's car, the spare set he forced her to keep. Just in case. I unfolded the note. Idaline's handwriting, usually small and uncertain, was large here, with strong pressure. In places, the paper was torn by the pen. "Mama, I got in the car only because he wouldn't have given me my ID if I hadn't gone. I'm getting out at the first stoplight. I'm not going with him to a hotel, and I'm not coming back to you to ask for money. I'm going to the country, to that house. I know it's cold, and the roof leaks, but there is a stove. I'll light it. I'll manage. I want to live alone for the first time in my life, without him and without your care. I'm filing for divorce. Forgive me for everything. I must learn to be as strong as you. I love you, Idaline." I reread the note twice. The letters blurred, but not because I forgot my glasses. I imagined her right now, getting out of her husband's car at an intersection under his shouts and her mother-in-law's curses, alone in the dark, with a small bundle of things, but free. She chose not the comfort of a hotel and not a warm corner under my wing. She chose a shack with a stove, but it would be her stove and her fire. She didn't run away. She grew up. I pressed the note to my chest, right where my old, tired heart was beating hollowly. A smile appeared on my lips. Not the hard smile of a victor, but the soft, warm smile of a mother. I returned to the armchair. picked up the cooling cup, and looking into the dark window, behind which somewhere out there in the night my daughter was starting her new life, I whispered, "Good girl." And that is where this story ends, my dear listeners. A story that it is never too late to sweep the trash out of your life, whether it be old things or people who do not value us. Eulalia Vance acted harshly. Many will say, cruel. To kick out her own daughter, to put a mother with bad legs out the door. But let's think. Would Idalene have had even the slightest hope for salvation if her mother had given her money again and let her spend the night? Or would she have remained the shadow of her tyrant husband? Sometimes, for a person to learn to walk, you have to knock the crutches out from under their arms. Eulalia didn't just protect her apartment. She gave her daughter the scariest and most valuable gift, responsibility for her own destiny. And what do you think? Did the heroine do the right thing, or should a mother's heart forgive everything, even betrayal? Write your opinion in the comments. I read every one of them, and we will definitely discuss the most interesting points of view. If this story touched you, if you worried for Eulalia and are proud of Idalene, support us with a like and be sure to subscribe to the channel. We have many more true, honest, and poignant stories ahead. We wish you all the best. At the end of this video, a window will appear in the center of the screen. Click on it to watch our other most gripping stories. Until next time.